Hey guys, my name's Nick. I'm a Microsoft Certified Expert Administrator. I create a lot of content for MSPs, and today I'm going to be talking to you about conditional access. So this is a basic diagram of conditional access and everything it entails. I know that it could be a little bit overwhelming here, but I'm going to be going through this and giving you guys some demos today around the policies you can create. But I'm really excited about this technology. It's pretty powerful just because of all the things that you can do from a granular standpoint and the additional security it provides as we shift into a new landscape here. So getting into it, if we look at our agenda today, we're going to be going over the licensing requirements for conditional access. We're going to get introduced to the zero trust model and the shifting landscape that we're moving to here. We're going to go into how to pitch conditional access to your customers, what kinds of questions you should be asking them when you're thinking about moving from a Office 365 Business Premium plan potentially to M365 Business and things of that nature. Additionally, we're going to be going into the technical benefits from an engineering standpoint, and all of this is going to be encompassed in a demo that I give you guys around the policy creation and user experience and things like that. So first, to start off here, when we think about the licensing requirements, the most common that you'll probably look into here is EMS plus E3, mostly because you get this as part of your competencies if you're a silver or gold partner with Microsoft. So you're able to get these plans that encompass Intune and Azure AD P1. So I would highly recommend implementing these services and testing out some of the policies that you can create and that you'll see here today. The next basic plan that we see here is M365 Business. This is the newer packages from Microsoft. This is traditionally what you're going to be upgrading your customers from when they've traditionally been on a Office 365 Business Premium plan. Next, we have Azure AD P1 and P2. These are $6 and $9 plans per user. It is an Active Directory plan that it does encompass Azure AD features such as conditional access, SSO, and up to 10 applications in certain cases, or unlimited in these cases, and other basic features like that. And then lastly, we have M365 E3 and E5. These are higher price point SKUs, $32 for E3 and the $64 plan for E5. So a little bit higher price point for our enterprise-based customers. Mostly I'm going to be catering towards the M365 business customers here in that tenant as well too for our demos. So when we look at the current landscape, we are shifting from this perimeter trusted network into a zero trust model across our businesses because we're shifting to an employee mindset that really thinks of, hey, I want to work from anywhere at any time at any place. And they are also onboarding a ton of new SaaS applications to their businesses to try to enhance productivity. But this is ultimately causing a bunch of shadow IT and a lot of security vulnerabilities for us as the IT providers. While it can be alarming from a security standpoint, it's also a great opportunity to provide additional value as an MSP from a services offering and also give a good talk track for your customers when they're thinking about upgrading from Office 365 Business Premium into M365 Premium. So you're going from that $12.50 price point to $20 price point. So additionally, we are looking at the newer technologies like conditional access that we'll be going through today that leverage device and user trust claims, such as the tokens that we get when we produce MFA, for instance, to gate access to data and resources where traditionally, again, we've had this trusted perimeter network that's been spanned by a firewall that we set up, and we were only controlling access from that in our local Active Directory and things of that nature. So this is the kind of shift that we're looking to move into here. So some of the benefits of moving to this model with conditional access technologies and things of that nature, we are allowing certain resources to have access in certain locations. So we're looking from the top down on critical resources that from a DLP standpoint to a heightened level security standpoint, and we are able to control access to these devices based off of user risk or device risk, which is really cool concept from what we've traditionally done in the past. So from this point of access, we can really prevent access to company resources from the standpoint of a breach, such as stolen credentials or a compromised device that's not healthy anymore, as in maybe there's malware content on the device or it was infected with ransomware off of your network or something like that. So the ultimate goal of all of this, as IT professionals, is really to enable users to continue to be productive at work, but not, restrict them at all, and also to provide them a solution that heightens security and heightens compliance if they do have to follow that as well too. So some common examples of this on a very high level, we're thinking about conditions and then requirements to go along with those conditions or meet those conditions. So when you're thinking of this, as in the common examples that we see here, you're saying, hey, if you want access to these cloud applications, and if you're in this group, or if you're this user, then I don't want to allow you access if you're outside of my corporate network, or if you're on an iOS device, for instance, you can't access your Office suite is a good example. Secondly, we have and or statements. So you can require multiple conditions or multiple requirements to be met for certain conditions. So this is saying, hey, if you want access to this certain financial data and you're a part of this group, but you are outside the corporate network and you are on a Android device, then you need to have both MFA and that device enrolled within my MDM solution in order to get access. The other one for this is the or statement, so it's just one or the other, and that's the same scenario, but saying either MFA is a requirement or the device is compliant, one or the other, and whatever's easier access is going to give it. So if it's a compliant device, then it's not going to go through MFA. But if it's not compliant, it's going to prompt you for MFA in order to get access to those resources, if that makes sense. And this will get a little bit easier, guys, as I go through the actual demos as well. So this is a common business example that we're going to reference, and I'm going to come back to a solution after we go through the actual implementation of these policies so you can see firsthand how we're solutioning this for a customer. So in this environment, we have 5 end users. It's a very small business, but they access Office Suite, they access a line of business app on premises, and they have a couple of third-party SaaS applications that they've onboarded, like Dropbox here, for their storage. So they have all of the access on their Windows 10 devices that are joined to your local Active Directory, and you have group policy objects that are applied. We don't have any mobile devices enrolled in an MDM solution, but naturally, in this day and age, especially, we're assuming that end users are accessing their corporate mail via their native mobile device on their phone, or mobile app, I should say. So they are potentially accessing critical data where it could get lost or stolen, or the employee could leave and they could still have access to that corporate data in some cases, or they're taking screenshots or saving this data in unsecured locations like their personal Google Drive, for instance, as an example. We also would like for them to be on our network to access certain sensitive business critical applications. These can include things like customer or intellectual IP that we would never have a leakage of, or other things that could get infected with ransomware that are business critical and could really cripple our business ultimately. So we want those to only be accessed on compliant devices that are in a healthy state or on our corporate network where we have that trusted perimeter. For the Office suite, we want them to be able to access their files on personal devices outside the network, but we want to prevent them from downloading or saving those files to an untrusted location, like their personal documents or laptops. So this one's pretty common. Additionally, we could say we want them to be compliant devices in order for users to be able to download that. And I'll be showing both of those in the policies that we create. And then lastly here, we have certain applications that have sensitive company info. We want them to be using heightened level of security to access those if they're not on our corporate network, and be prompted for MFA. So keep this in mind. We'll be revisiting it later, but the policies we'll be showing and creating here today are going to be what you want to pay attention to. So my best advice to you as the MSP is really to perform an assessment. So this is going to help you both from a business use case when you're thinking about coming into a customer to try to upgrade them from M360 or Office 365 Business Premium $12.50 again price point to a $20 price point of M365 business. Not only do you have the heightened revenue from that, but you also get additional incentives from the kickbacks if you're a silver or gold competency partner from Microsoft. Additionally to that, though, I mean, the M365 business SKU does have a lot of security features, DLP features, MDM scenarios as well too that are bolted in. So this is only really one component of it, but it can be used across the entire stack, so it's pretty powerful. But the biggest thing here is what I'm mentioning is to perform an assessment with the customer to tailor this solution so you can really sell this in the long term. So this is some of the questions that I pulled up here that you want to be asking. So who are the users in this company and what are their security roles? So what resources do they have access to and what rights do they have access to? We want to move to a model of least privilege access. So we want them to have just the amount of access they need for the application without getting overboard on putting a bunch of global admins in a tenant, for instance, something of that nature to reduce our security or exposure, I should say, from the attack standpoint. So the second question to that would be, what apps are they trying to access? So getting a clear inventory of what applications they're currently onboarded and currently accessed with corporate credentials or save corporate data on is very pertinent, not only from a security standpoint, but if they have to follow certain compliance regulations, you need to know this in order to comply if you were to get audited in the standpoint of HIPAA, FINRA, or something like that. The bigger question too is what apps contain business critical data. So these are the apps that you want to be much more restrictive on from the standpoint of accessing these apps from BYOD devices, from users that aren't on your network, from users who aren't prompted for MFA. These are very important considerations to take into mind and bring to light for the customer as well too. So in addition to discovering the apps, you need to ask the questions of how are they accessing the apps, in what scenarios? Is this always on the corporate network? Is this in a place where you want or you have them accessing it on their mobile device? Do they have freedom to access it on their personal laptop? Where exactly are they doing most of their work? Are the devices managed by IT? So again, the biggest consideration here is if they're using a mobile device and accessing and saving corporate data to unsecured locations. That's a pretty big concern, not only for non-compliant customers, but also from a general business perspective. What conditions are required? These last two questions, I should preface, really are the most important ones here. So once you discover all this data, these last two questions are really on you as an IT administrator to answer. So what conditions are required in order to access corporate resources? So you're defining what do they have to do to access certain resources, and this can be holistic, as in every resource is treated the same, but I highly recommend weighting different applications based off of the sensitive information that may be involved, whether that be customer employee PII, whether that be sensitive financial data that couldn't be leaked, whether that be intellectual IP that would be highly business critical as well too. So what are the conditions in which people can access these resources, and defining that is really one of the biggest things that you want to do. And then secondly, to piggyback off that, what are the controls based off the conditions that you want to implement? So it's an if-then statement. So if they're accessing it in this manner, what rights do you want them to have? Or what additional security do you want them to have? Do you want them to require MFA? Do you want the device to be compliant? Do you want them to be on your network? Asking these questions and getting this perspective is really going to help you in coming into a client conversation to try to sell this to them and realizing how exposed they are in today's landscape. So these are the policies that I'll be going through and creating as part of the demo today, but these are the ones that I've identified as probably the most common that you guys will run across in your space from the SMB perspective. And these include things like requiring MFA for admins, requiring MFA for external users, blocking access to apps with no protection policy on mobile, blocking access to non-compliant devices, blocking legacy auth, requiring trusted network for user enrollment, and blocking download to personal devices. Optionally, we can bypass MFA for legacy auth related apps and then requiring MFA for all users. So these might not make all sense to you right now currently, but I'm going to be going through each of them as a demo, and you'll have much better perspective there. After we get through the demo, I'm going to show you from the business standpoint what kinds of questions additionally you could be asking your client to, one, show them the value of these services, and two, to make them realize how exposed they could be from a security or compliance standpoint. And then from the technical side of things, one, how it's making you the IT hero. So really controlling access into these certain applications in a secure manner, but also not inhibiting productivity. And then also garnering, shadow IT and really controlling that from a company standpoint, while we're shifting into a ton of cloud applications that are coming out that companies are using. So let's pop into the demo account here and start writing up these policies that you can see here. So I'm in a M365 business tenant, and this is something where, if I go back to the admin center here, there's a couple different places you can access conditional access from this admin center, one of which is the Azure Active Directory portal, the second of which is in the Endpoint Management portal. For conditional access, I like to act out of the Active Directory portal, mostly because they have this new feature in preview right now that you can see, and this is the portal, sorry, that I pulled up here. And once you get into this portal, there's a couple different ways you can access it. You could go to all services and search for conditional access, or you could go to security and click on conditional access here to come to the same portal. The only difference that you'll see here, though, is you have this new state that's in preview, which is report only. And this is only available through this user experience, through the Azure Active Directory portal, not through the Endpoint Manager portal. You won't see this here. So that's why I bring it up. I think it's highly powerful for MSPs to be able to do this, so you can track some of the changes after you implement a policy, for instance, so you can better understand the impact before actually rolling it out. A common example of this is trying to set up an app protection policy where you only allow access to managed applications on or in the tenant itself. And you didn't realize that a lot of these guys in the business are using their Google Drive data to transfer data across their OneDrive or something of that nature. And all of a sudden, you're getting blown up with help desk calls and tickets and things of that nature. So this is a great service that I highly recommend utilizing. Common misconception, though, or thing that you should take into note, it is only available with Azure AD P1 plans. So EMS again plus E3 comes with this, standalone Azure AD P1, and then the EMS E3, or sorry, M365 E3, E5 plans. M365 Business, while you can see this within this tenant, you're not going to be able to see the reporting, because if you go into Azure Active Directory, and you go into the sign-ins where you would see this activity and this telemetry, it's going to tell you don't have access. So again, kind of confusing there from the standpoint of just administering this and having that option available, but not actually being able to see it. It's kind of confusing. But if you do have a P1 subscription, definitely utilize this as well too, so you can slowly implement this across your customers and realize the impact. So a couple of things to note when we get to this page. You'll notice this little infographic here that's talking about baseline policies and then becoming end of life as of February 29th, 2020. This is pretty big news that Microsoft's been reporting, where we're moving into what they call security defaults. And these baseline policies are basically being all rolled up into one toggle, that is binary on or off switch. And from the standpoint of the MSP, there's two basic concerns that you have. One of which is the fact that by default now, net new tenants will have the security defaults on. And that means that all users, not just admin users, are going to have multi-factor authentication turned on by default. Second issue of which is that it blocks legacy authentication. So if you do have any apps that are running IMAP POP SMTP protocols, that will break them and they will experience a disruption in service. So you have to be cognizant of that when you have a new tenant or you go to turn on these security settings. So within here, if you go to Azure Active Directory and you click on Properties, You'll see it's kind of hidden down here. It's not great, but it says manage security defaults. I've got it turned off in this tenant. If I click on yes, you'll notice this message comes up, which means that have already implemented conditional access policies. So if you do have a tenant that has access to the conditional access policies and you've turned them on, security defaults will be nulled out. So it prevents you from enabling them. So it will have you go either delete those conditional access policies before turning this on. Highly recommend, if you do have conditional access policies, that you use those instead of these security defaults, just because you'll have a much better and controlled experience from a customer standpoint. This is nice if you want a quick hit and you want them to have MFA and block legacy authentication. But again, if you're going to plan on implementing this and really utilizing the rich services that conditional access has to offer, I would recommend turning it off. Bigger consideration for MSP's tenants or systems that they use is things like SMTP, right? So we have traditional printers, copiers that use SMTP protocol that will get disrupted if you turn this on in customer environments, and then also your ticketing system will be turned off. It's using IMAP POP protocols as well too. So be cognizant and take note of that before you turn these on, and be cognizant of any conditional access policies. But the bigger thing with that one is that you will be prompted, like we saw there, to turn off one or the other. So moving back into the conditional access blade here, another way to get to it is under security and conditional access. So what I want you guys to do is just simply ignore all these when you get in there, because they're end of life as of the end of this next month, and you won't be wanting to turn them on. So the first thing I like as a foundation is this name location area. So I really consider this to be the foundation, especially for those of you who have had perimeter networks or do still have perimeter networks. If you have a customer that's cloud-based only, not VPNing into a local network or anything like that, you can kind of ignore this. But this does allow you to set some IP ranges for a trusted location. And like you see as the example, this is the Redmond office, and you can name those locations. And then when we're going through our if-then statements and conditional access policies, this is kind of the foundation. So a common one is saying, hey, if you're on my network, I don't need you to be prompted for MFA. These can also be VPN, proxy IPs, and things like that for however your users are accessing your local network. But this is really the foundation. So it's either do you want to allow access outside your network or not, is a common first step in the vast features that we can actually turn on with conditional access. So this is how this looks here. I'll run through a couple of these other ones here. So custom controls. This is a good one if you have or you want to use Duo as your multi-factor authentication provider instead of Microsoft Authenticator. You can look this up. I have a video of it on my channel showing you how to set this up for Duo. They have it for Authy as well too if you use that one. But if you're using another provider, definitely look it up. I would just say Azure AD, whatever your provider is, MFA conditional access or something like that, and you'll find the article if they've written one for how to put in the JSON format there. Terms of use is only available in the premium subscriptions here. Again, this is kind of misleading at first, but then you get at least access denied here, whereas with the report only, you don't. So this is saying, you could put up a conditional access policy that says, hey, you can access Salesforce, for instance, but in order to grant you access, I want you to accept my terms of use. So this is pretty cool, but it is only for those P1, P2 licensing features as well. So those are the big ones there. I'm not going to go over VPN connectivity and classic policies, but I will go into the conditional access policies here. So like I showed you on the slides, I'm going to be going through a couple of different ones here, but these are the ones I feel like are most pertinent, but will also give you the most information. And then outside of this, I will be doing a deep dive on each one of these policies just so you can get the full breadth of exactly how it works, such as app protection policies. So the first one that we see here is enforce MFA for admins. So the first thing you'll do is add it here up top as far as the name. And then down below we have our conditions, and then we have our controls. So these are our conditions, and then these are requirements based off of these conditions. So just keep that mindset in the forefront here while we go through setting up these policies. So for requiring MFA for admins, we really have a couple different features here. You can select and scope this out to certain users, and in this process, I highly recommend if you're going to choose all users, you exclude at least one user here. That's your break glass scenario. I don't even think they will let you save this anymore. I think because they got blown up with help desk calls. But as a best practice, definitely exclude one person here as a break glass scenario so you don't get locked out of your account in case you all lose access to MFA. Can't get back in as a global admin. The one that we want to do here, though, is under directory roles. I've already selected 3, but you'll see here these are the elevated security permissions that you can select from. And during here, you can choose which ones you want to use. But these are the most common I've seen across MSPs, global admin being the most pertinent, especially for partner center requirements from the secure application model that Microsoft came out with in August of last year. You'll notice up top here, though, you do have all guests and external users, which is really cool for companies that have contractors that come in temporarily to help them out with certain projects or need access to certain applications. You can really scope out their access and limit it to just what they need, which is great, instead of trying to give them access to an entire tenant and access to all the company resources. You can really scope this out so that your security is limited, or exposure, I should say, is limited. Users and groups, straightforward, scoping it out to individuals or groups within your organization, and directory roles we just touched on there. So the next thing you want to look at is cloud applications. You can, again, include all applications, and it's giving you multiple warnings to try not to lock yourself out. You can select applications, and these are the ones natively included from the Microsoft Office suite. And then additionally, any ones that you've added, customized in the enterprise applications section here of Azure AD. These could be third-party SaaS applications that are in the gallery. I think there's over 3,000 now, so it's growing quite rapidly. And then there's also your own personal on-prem line of business applications that you can add and customize, and things of that nature here. So not only does this give you single sign-on, but you can use conditional access then to gate who has access to there. So this would be saying something like, I have these apps that, I want to require MFA, but maybe I have a business critical app that I don't want people to access off the network, or I don't want people to access it all on devices that aren't in my MDM solution or in a healthy state. From the standpoint of a compliance policy that I've pushed out to them with Intune, for instance. So that's a pretty powerful one here. And again, you could exclude certain applications that you wanted as well. So you could just scope this out and remove a couple. Common use case for this that we'll get into is blocking legacy authentication, but excluding a few that you can't do right now. And we'll get again into that a little bit more in depth. This primarily common use case for this is saying you want, or the use case I would use in this example is to say that, again, in the conditions, we're going to define maybe you want to be on your trusted network, but you want your users to enroll their MFA details, such as their phone, for their second factor, or the app. You want them to do that on your network. So that way, in case somebody has their credentials compromised before they set up MFA, the bad actor is not the one who's actually doing that on their behalf. So I like to turn this on because I know that my users will be enrolling from a location that I'm designating as trusted, but you can choose whether or not you want to do that. So conditions here, a couple different ones. Device platforms, you can scope this out to certain device platforms. By default, it's going to grab all. And for the case of MFA here, I want to leave that at all. Certain policies that we'll get into, you'll see we only scope out the mobile devices, but we'll get into that. Locations here, so you want to include any location, but you're going to say I want to exclude all trusted locations. So that's saying, hey, if you are on the network, then I don't want to have to prompt you for MFA. So the whole overall goal, again, of all of this is to be secure, but not interrupt the workflows of our users day to day so that they become highly frustrated and blame you for not being able to get work done in a productive manner. Client apps we'll get into with some other of the policies there, and I'll skip over that for now. And device state we'll get into as well too. So I'm going to skip over these. And then grant. So this one here, we're going to grant access, but we are going to require multi-factor authentication. I'll be getting into some of these other ones here as we go across the policies, but this is where we come into our and/or statement where it's saying, okay, I want to have more than one. So if I was to select that, we could say all, and so the device would have to be compliant, and it would have to prompt them successfully for a multi-factor authentication in order for them to access any of the apps that we've selected here. In this particular case, though, I just want to say it doesn't matter since we're only selecting one, but I'm just going to say the one. And session, the last one here, we'll get into app enforced restrictions. Conditional app access app controls outside the scope of this course, just simply because it's with Cloud App Security. It's another product from Microsoft that's not encompassed in the licensing reflected here with M365B, so I'm not going to go into it. Sign-in frequency, for those of you who are used to traditional Microsoft, the old portal, there you're saying, hey, trust this device for X amount of days, and they give you hours now too. As the best security practice, don't recommend turning this on no matter what, but you can choose to. Again, we want to make this something that's light touch to them. Persistent browser session, pretty straightforward there. It'll just persist without having to log them out after X amount of time. Again, security practice, best recommend just to leave this off. So we have everything configured there. We're not going to change anything, but it does tell us, hey, please don't lock yourself out. That's giving us multiple attempts here to not lock ourselves out or exclude ourselves out of this policy. So I'm not going to say because I already did, but this is another good one that you can set up to enforce MFA across all admins. Again, you could scope that out to all users if you wanted everybody to be prompted for MFA. And then if they don't have MFA, the next time they sign in, they'll be prompted to set up those secondary factors that you've defined, whether that be phone or Microsoft Authenticator and things like that. So the next one that we'll get into here is actually device compliance policy. So this is only if you are leveraging Intune and you're leveraging MDM. So it only applies to MDM users, but Intune is very powerful and it's becoming more popular as time goes on here. But what we want to show is a user trying to access corporate resources from an unmanaged device and what that it looks like from an end user standpoint. So very much similar to what we looked at last time, but the basic purpose of this one that I want to show you too is the fact that if you want heightened security on certain applications or certain access outside of a trusted perimeter, then one of these conditions from heightened security, popular one, is device compliance. So within Intune, you can set device compliance policies here. This is a little outside the scope of this, but the device compliance policy is something where you can define certain hardware requirements, BitLocker encryption be present on there, any detection of malware, it becomes the uncompliant. So there's a myriad of different settings that you can set up to make it compliant. One has to be enrolled, but secondly, it's going to be having to follow these certain requirements. So a couple of common examples, you have business critical apps that you don't want users to access if they're on their personal laptop, for instance, where they haven't enrolled in MDM, or you don't want access to certain applications or any application from an infected device that's on an unhealthy state. So a couple of different ones there. Same thing, scope, we can select anybody here. I've just selected the one user to show you as an example. Secondly, you can define the apps. Again, we can target more business critical apps to say we want to allow device compliance, so we can just make it all. Conditions, nothing really going to be unique here. But again, this really depends on the business use case. So that's where that assessment initially comes into play. That can be pretty powerful. Grant, so all we're doing here is we want to grant access and require the device to be marked as compliant. I could do and or, again here if I really wanted to, but that's what I'm going to stick with. And then this section here, I'm not going to select any session controls. So from an end user standpoint, I'm going to pop into demo PC. And here I'm going to go into a new instance and I'm just going to log in as this end user. All right, one more time. So here we get this message that basically says this application contains sensitive information and can't be accessed from devices and client applications that meet, and then your organization name, in this case it's T-365, management compliance policy. The cool thing here, kind of cool, kind of not cool, is that it's giving you a link to go straight into the settings where you could add a work at school account and actually enroll this device in the MDM solution. And with Intune, if you've had auto enrollment turned on, it will automatically join and be the mobile device managed through your organization. The big problem I see with this is the fact that most users are going to be local users, not local admins. So they're not going to have the permissions capable of being able to add their own device, and they're going to get stuck. But it does gate them from accessing the resources. So while it might be something that's not foolproof from the standpoint of raising help desk calls, it does secure the applications if it is something that's business critical or something of that nature. Similar message here, if the device becomes incompliant, so it's not meeting the policies that you've set up, such as BitLocker encryption or having a firewall present or having certain AV present or no malicious content on the device, if it rolls from a compliant state to an incompliant state and they try to log in, they'll get a similar message here, but it'll just basically say that their device is no longer in a compliant state and to contact their IT administrator for further assistance. So that's when they would actually reach out to you. And you can create alerts in Intune to ping you when a device becomes incompliant. So you could be proactive about that. But if you don't want to be, then that's how they would be reaching out to you as well. So that's device compliance. Another cool one there if you're using Intune. Again, you can scope that out to your MDM users only, and they will get that. Just be aware, maybe you only want to apply that to Windows devices because if they try to access their corporate data on mobile, they're going to get blocked. And again, overall goals here is to make sure everybody's productive, but not, you're secure in their access, things like that. So the next couple here I want to go into, we want to touch on blocking legacy authentication. So legacy authentication is legacy protocols like IMAP, POP, SMTP again that I touched on earlier from what security defaults is becoming. And with this particular policy, we can come in and look at the basic information here. So the big thing with this one, and it's documented in this documentation here, if you actually look this up, is the fact that you choose all users here because of their hard security requirements, and the fact again that they've probably been blown up by people trying to access this after they've gotten blocked. They want you to exclude global administrators. So legacy authentication again blocks these legacy protocols, but it also blocks on a more I would say common use case Exchange Online commandlets for PowerShell. So a lot of people or third-party SaaS providers use these commandlets to access information, and common SaaS providers of this would be companies like Dropsuite, for instance, or another backup provider or a common migration tool like BitTitan or Skykick, for instance, as well too. So if you're using global admin creds with impersonation rights, you'll be fine, but you want to exclude these users so you're not blocking access. Secondly, here, what we want to do is go into the Cloud Apps section. Again, this is where you could just white label a couple of these apps as well, where you say, hey, I want to block legacy authentication except for, and then define what these apps are. And these, again, are the ones that you've put into the enterprise application section here. It's going to be additional configuration, obviously, with those. And the custom applications, if you do add those, does require an Azure AD P1 license. Keep that in mind, $6 a user per month, but with one user, you can add unlimited applications. So just be aware. And keep that in mind. So conditions here, this is a big one. So we're going to say client apps. This is where we're getting into this section. And these are where you can define policies for particular browsers or the mobile or desktop clients. And in this case, we're going to specifically target this other clients, which is, again, 2010 Office Suite and then IPOP SMTP. And then device state, again, I'm not going to worry about for this one. This time, though, binary, we're going to just block access. Pretty straightforward. And then session controls, we're not doing anything here for this one. Okay, so this is a good way to cover the security landscape, but also make sure you're not interrupting service with Exchange Online PowerShell with these third-party SaaS providers. End of support for legacy protocols is going to be October of 2020. Microsoft announced that. So you'll definitely need to keep that in mind. Most significantly for your ticketing systems and for your clients who you're using SMTP relay for copiers, printers, etc. Okay, cool. So next one that we're going to do here is going to be blocking a download to a personal device. So this is saying, hey, I want my users to be productive. I don't want to restrict them to the point of blocking them if they're not on a trusted network, if they're not on a trusted device. But I do want them to not be able to download documentation down to their local PC, like a Word or Excel doc or any other untrusted location. So this is where we have this block download to personal. And in this particular case, as a test to show you guys the end user experience, I just added one user. But again, you could scope this to whoever you want. And in this case, I selected one application. So currently right now, this data DLP read-only block download only applies to Exchange Online and SharePoint Online. And today we're going to focus on Exchange Online. So it's saying if you're using Exchange Online, then you cannot download these documents locally or at all. Locations, this is a good one. So you're saying if you're not on my network, again, just like the MFA one, then I'm going to prevent you from downloading. And so you're saying include any location, but exclude all trusted. For client apps, we are going to select the browser because we're assuming these guys are accessing it in the web, and we don't have to select anything down below here. And then this is where device state can come into play too. So maybe you want to say, okay, well, I still want to allow them to download, but I want that device to be rolled into my MDM solution as a best practice. So it's got to be a healthy device in order to access these certain resources off of my network. So this is where you could say exclude, and then you're going to say exclude marking device as compliant. So devices that are healthy and enrolled into MDM, this policy really isn't going to apply to. And that's what I did. I'm not going to save it again, but you'll see it here. So for grant, you don't have to do anything for this. You're just going to grant access. You don't have to say any of these requirements. And then session, this is where this one comes into play. So before you saw that was kind of grayed out if you're paying attention there, but this is where we can say use app enforce restrictions. And again, this specifically applies to SharePoint and Exchange Online. There's a great article here from Elliot from GCITS. He has really great content around multi-tenant commands and articles like this that show you how to set this up. The biggest thing with this one is the PowerShell commandlets that you need to run on this as well too in order for this to fully work. So with the PowerShell commandlets, we just basically need to turn on read-only access for this conditional access policy for our OWA mailbox policy. So the first thing you would do, and you can follow again these steps within there, but the first thing you would do is connect to Exchange Online via an elevated PowerShell prompt. So run PowerShell as administrator, run the commands to connect to Exchange Online, log in as a global administrator, and then you can either run this get OWA mailbox policy. I recommend the commandlets that he's using in there though to identify. This is most likely going to be the name of your policy if it's a newer tenant. So it's OWA mailbox policy default. But you can see that if you run this command, and then it's asking me to do this again. Okay, so when you run this, if you were to run it without some of the ones that he's designating, this is the name that you see here, the ID. But the identity is actually the main piece there that you would use in the commandlet that you're looking to run. These are the ones that you're going to be turning on. So by default, these are turned off, the access policy, but in doing or running the commandlet, we are switching it to read only. So it's this command line. So we're setting the policy, we're setting it to default, we're setting the conditions access policy to read only. And after these two things are in place, so you need to have that in place and you need to have the policy set. When you think of an end user standpoint, again, if we go back to this portal, I'm logged in here as that user that I assigned the policy to. And I'm in his OWA mailbox here, and I've got this email with this credit card information here. You'll notice though, if I hover over and I click the drop down, I don't have access to download this. Whereas somebody who's not having the targeted policy, this is another user in the tenant. This is Adele, but this is the same tenant as Alex. So you'll notice here that she actually has the download link here, and we can also click on download from the drop-down list here. So that's pretty big just because they can't download it. And one thing I would want to note or take note for you guys is with the M365 business queue, users can still open this up in another window and technically download this document without any type of prompt of not being able to do so. So that while they're limited within this portal to not download it, they are still able to open that document up and download it. So that's kind of a bummer in testing and looking at that from the feature set. You actually need the full-on Azure P1 licensing to get what you intend from a behavior standpoint if you're actually following the steps and seeing the examples both from Elliot and also from Microsoft, which is this. So this is, let me just open this back up. This is another tenant that I've set this up on, but this one actually has P1 licensing in it. And this is a document from Steven, and I'm going over and I'm opening this. But this is the experience, a little bit different. So it doesn't open up a new window, same settings, everything from the policy standpoint, but because of the licensing, it gives me this banner that says your organization doesn't allow you to download, print, or sync to this device. Please use a device that's joined to the domain. So this is, much better messaging to the end user and experience because I physically can't even download this, whereas in the other scenario, there's kind of a workaround for the end user to go and do so. So just keep that in mind. End user experience is much more powerful with the P1 licensing for sure. Okay. All right, so I'll close out of this one here. Last one I want to show you guys before we get into the wrap up and the business use cases is restricting the access to apps with an app protection policy. So this is something included with Intune MAM, so Mobile Application Management. So there's MDM, Mobile Device Management, and there's MAM. So with MDM, the device actually has to be physically enrolled within your tenant in order for you to be able to push down these policies and things like that. With MAM, it doesn't have to be an enrolled device. It can be a personal BYOD device, but the actual apps that access corporate data are protected, and you can wipe them after a person leaves the company or that device is lost or stolen. So this is pretty powerful because nobody's going to want to enroll their personal iPhone to your company in a lot of cases, but you still want to lock down DLP scenarios and also security. So one of the first things we actually have to do for that is go into the Endpoint Manager portal here. This has been rebranded. It used to be the Device Management Admin Center. It was rebranded back in November, and now it's a much cleaner experience in my opinion. But we can go into the app section here, and we'll click on App Protection Policies. I've created a couple of test policies already, but I'm going to go through and create a new one just so you see the full experience. You can create a policy for iOS, Android, and Windows 10. The conditional access policy that I'm going to show you is specifically towards these mobile devices. I'm going to click on Android. You can name this whatever you want and give it a good description so everybody knows exactly what it's doing. High level here, I'm going to do another video deep diving into this here, but I did want to show you this. You're most likely going to want to turn to unmanaged. So by saying yes, you're saying, you know, all types, unmanaged, corporate enrolled devices I want to target. And if you do that, it's going to ask the user to enroll their device in MDM if they're trying to access Outlook, for instance. And you don't want that experience. You want them to remain unmanaged from an MDM standpoint, but actually get that app under management. So here's where we can actually add certain applications that are already pre-listed, and these again can flow through the apps that you've added into the Azure Active Directory Enterprise Applications section. We touched on that a little bit earlier, but mostly you're going to probably want to do the entire Office suite or whatever they have access to, just so you can prevent cut, copy, paste. You can prevent sharing to unmanaged applications. Good example of that is sharing or saving an Excel sheet to their personal Google Drive or personal OneDrive or anything like that. So these are good to note. And then here we get into some of the more granular settings, like being able to back it up. Basic ones here, you want to restrict it to being able to transfer between managed apps. You want to restrict cut, copy, paste to managed apps and things of that nature. I'm not going to, again, go through all of this, but there's a lot of things that you can block from this standpoint. You can also encrypt the data. You can block them from printing, and you can define when they open up documents if they're opened up in a managed browser. So very granular. Again, I'll be doing another video to fully encompass all the settings here, but just want to show you what this looks like from a high-level overview. This is great because it requires like a secondary factor to get into the device itself, so they can set up a PIN in which they can use. And if you have higher level devices on iOS or Android, you can start to use biometrics instead of a PIN, which is great. And then conditional launch, this is giving you some more granular controls to wipe data for inactivity and things of that nature on the device itself. So it's not like it's wiping their entire Outlook mailbox, right? It's just on that device. And it's also blocking access to jailbroken or rooted devices as well. And then you scope this out to certain users, right? And you assign that policy to them. And this is the basic prerequisite to the conditional access policy that we're going to create. So you would define scopes of users or groups that you want this to apply to. And you can simply click on all users here in this particular case. You can click on next. It gives you a summary, and you can go ahead and create that. So this is, again, prerequisite to the other policy that we're going to create in the conditional access portal. But what we want to do here, I've got it listed as app protection policy. And here, there's a couple of different settings that we haven't been exposed to yet. But the first of which is saying, okay, we want to scope this out to certain users again. We want to scope this out to all applications. Big one here though, you want to define the device platforms. So I would say iOS, Android is a good one to choose for this, just because you want to scope it out to the actual mobile devices. And the client apps section here, you could just say yes, and then mobile apps and desktop apps. And these are using all these protocols. Device state, I didn't worry about. But this one here, I want to grant access, and really I could just do require an app protection policy, and that will apply to Outlook. The require approved client app is another great one. So you could say if you're trying to access, a good example of this is somebody trying to get onto their native mail app on their mobile device, and they type in their credentials, and they would immediately get a message that says, hey, sorry, your IT administrator doesn't allow you to access corporate data on this application. In certain cases, like we'll see here in a minute with Android, it'll redirect you to the Google Play Store where you can download Outlook and you can go and get up and running there. But in other cases, you're just going to get blocked in the case of iOS. So good to note with the approved client app section, approve app protection policy. It shows a list of client apps here that they support, and right now it's just looking like it's Outlook. So if you want all of the apps where it's saying, hey, if you want to access Word instead of trying to access somewhere else or anything like that, these would be a list of the approved applications and it's in their entire suite. So it's saying you can only access these resources from these apps. So I'm going to leave that one here and I'll select that. And I have this turned on. I'm going to select save though. And I'm actually going to show you guys what this looks like from an end user standpoint on an Android device. So you can see that. And we'll go to that right now and we'll be right back. Okay, so we're here on the Android device and we're opening up the native app and we're going to add our account here. So you can come in and type in your corporate credentials. This is like the end user adding their email address. It's going through, it's kind of deceiving at first, showing you that it's retrieving the account information and finishing things up. But you'll notice when you get into the inbox, they'll have an email sitting here and it'll detail out that your IT department requires you to use the Outlook app. And it'll give them this link that they can click on to go into the Google Play Store. So it'll redirect down, and if you've already installed it, this is what it'll look like. But if you haven't, it'll click on install and it'll install the app. Once you have the app here, you're going to go ahead and sign in again with the corporate credentials. Type in the password as the end user here, and then register device for MAM. And it'll tell you that it's being protected by the IT department. You need to restart the app. So once you do that, I might have you sign in here one more time after it's been organized, but it's telling you it's protecting the data and that it needs you to set up the PIN. This is part of that app protection policy that we defined earlier. So again, this is kind of like a secondary layer of protection towards these apps as well too, just in case it gets lost or stolen. And this cool thing, you can allow it to sync your contacts that are local as well. And here we're just finishing up by prompting for MFA and we'll be back into our account. Okay guys, so we're back and finishing up here. We're just going to go through last couple of slides. So from a business standpoint, we've kind of seen some of the value as far as being able to pitch this to your customers, but it's really having that assessment and breaking this down with the key stakeholders within the business to say, hey, what business critical apps do you leave exposed if they were to be accessed on an untrusted device? Do you have any protection in place if an employee leaves or if their personal device is lost or stolen? I would guess that many people don't have an answer to that, and they are leaving themselves exposed from that standpoint. Compliance is really going to be a big win for a lot of people just because of PII and unsecured data and data loss prevention considerations when we take a look at the general landscape today. And then third-party applications are making a big wave in onboarding. So what's a shadow IT policy? How do we control that? And this is all going out and performing that assessment so you can bring this to the customer and showing them what you found as exposure, where they could be breached, where they're not meeting compliance, things of that nature, to get them to understand, hey, this is why we need to move to these heightened security features. It's not only going to help me, but it's going to improve your entire security posture across the organization. From the technician standpoint, you're better able to restrict users' access without interrupting their productivity. So we don't want to be that person that's always getting help desk calls because they've lost their credentials. They can't get access to certain resources because they're not on the network or anything like that. So we're giving them more flexibility, but also teaching them the best ways to be compliant and be secure with their data. We can test these policies with the report-only capabilities. Again, this is with the P1 SKU, but you could also do this as a pilot if you don't have that. You just have M365B. Highly recommend that to your end users where you want to go out and implement a policy. Definitely test it with some champions first, see the kind of impact, and then move forward from there. Shadow IT again, this is going to better access or give you better access to how data is used across different applications. So again, coming back to this business use case, we have, the scenario where we had all these different various features going on, but we can create this app protection policy for Windows, Android, and iOS so that this entire Office suite and the Dropbox account are protected by these policies, so users cannot, access them off a corporate location in the sense of the LOB app there as well too. But we also require them to use those managed apps as trusted apps and not transfer data into unsecure locations, even on a personal device. And that allows us to have access over those data points and be able to wipe them if a user leaves. Secondly, when we look at the sensitive info like the business critical apps, we have the conditional access policy to have that on our trusted network and have a compliant device enrolled into Intune in order to access that. We've created this conditional access policy to restrict corporate data to only apps without protection policies, and we've created another one to require MFA on certain applications when they're not located on your network. So again, when we're taking a look at this common business use case, I feel like this is a clear example of immediate value that you can provide that is not only making the customer more secure, but it's also not really inhibiting their productivity or anything of that nature either. So again, coming back to the beginning here, hopefully this makes a lot more sense now in taking a look at this. We have our conditions, we have our controls based off of those conditions, and you can get very granular with how you want users to access data based off their location or based off the health of their user or the health of the device. So that's everything I had for you guys. I would love to hear any common policies you would want to implement or any additional feedback below. So feel free to comment on this video. Thanks and have a great day.